Welcome to the JP Podcast. I'm your host, John.
And I'm your co-host, Tom.
And today we have Heather. She's from La Casita Jardin, and she got her own little channel there, and we're bringing her on.
How did you meet her? How did we end up at this podcast moment?
Actually, it goes back from when we did the greenhouse video. You know, I went down that rabbit hole. I was checking out other people's greenhouse videos. I was checking out their channels, while I was checking out their videos on the greenhouse, and I came across hers. And she seemed to be the only one who had more going on besides the greenhouse. So she had a little contact information. I reached out and asked her if she wanted to be on the show. Let's talk about the greenhouse. But she has so much more to talk about. So I was like, you know what? We're not even going to talk about the greenhouse. We're going to talk about everything that she's got going on. So, let's get started. Okay, we are back with Heather from La Casita Jardin, right?
Yes, that's right.
Well, welcome, Heather. We're very happy to have you on, and we appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I've been really excited about doing this podcast with you guys. So looking forward to everything that we're going to talk about today.
Heather, instead of me fumbling around trying to say everything you got going on there, why don't you give us a little bit of everything that you have going on with yourself there?
Well, everything that we've got going on here is definitely summer related. Right now, we're into our first flush of green beans. We've finally got tomatoes that are starting to really size up, and I'm just looking forward to it. We've been harvesting herbs a lot, and right now I'm actually in the middle of a problem. I cannot find, for whatever reason, I can't find a good Parmesan in my town.
Oh, wow.
Because I really need to get some pesto made.
Oh,
We've
wow.
got a ton of basil out there now that we need to be preserving, and I can't dry anymore. I've got so much. My container for the whole year is full.
Well, everything as far as your programs, and I know you have a YouTube channel and Insta. That's what I was basically asking. What all do you have as far as what you have out there, if I'm saying it right, Tom?
Yeah, we just promote all your channels, your email, anything.
Right now, as far as everything, we've got our Instagram and YouTube channel. They're up and going pretty strong at this point. So that's been a lot of fun. We've definitely been getting our presence out there a little bit more and are building community both locally and via Instagram and YouTube. So that's been pretty amazing to watch happen as well.
And you got
and of course it's all the information's on YouTube. I'll be giving that here for the show notes as well.
And you got more than just garden. You do like soaps, you do canning, you do preserves, you do all kinds of stuff. I was going through your channel and I was finding things, and I just love it. I love it from not only a content point of view, but from a creator's point of view. I could just sit there and watch you all day.
Well, thank you. Sometimes I wonder, because I go back, you watch your own videos and you go, gee, I sound like a dork. Oh, well.
Yeah.
And you just kind of keep going. But yeah, and what we do here, a lot of what we do is literally live the urban homesteading life. And so what you see as far as content on our channels and on basically all of our social media platforms is exactly what is transpiring. Sometimes, especially going into August, I have a hard time, confession moment, I have a hard time creating content because it is so much of a wash, rinse, repeat. I feel like I go to bed and then I get up the next day and I do the exact same thing over and over, because that is actually life. So in August, you'll probably see a lot of tomato content. And if you really go back to August, like last year on Instagram, you'll see nothing but me talking about tomatoes. And at some point, usually somebody says, I think we're done with you talking about tomatoes.
Yeah, when this show comes out, it will be in the middle of August. So we will be referring to everything as if we were in August. So what all do you have in your garden? What are the different things that you grow?
Right now we are doing quite a bit of experimentation. Historically, for us, we typically do all of the usual summer fare. So you're going to have your tomatoes, your basil, peppers, which I've had hit and miss results with peppers here. But I've tried peppers just about every year because I love peppers. But we're getting the hang of that at this point. We also do green beans, cucumbers. I actually have a dry storage bean that we are experimenting with currently, and that's been very, very beneficial in more than one way because we've had some soil contamination issues. So that's actually saved us and helped amend situations that otherwise probably wouldn't have been able to grow anything in those beds.
Okay. Real quick, growing up, going back to the beginning, did you grow up on a farm? Did you grow up farming your own food, or is this something that later in life you kind of discovered?
Well, a little bit of both, actually. When I was really young, we did live out on a farm. My great-grandfather had property and he had a cattle farm. And so it was out there for my time, about 4 years, but I remember the cows, I remember the garden, I remember my grandmother being very territorial over her strawberry patch. Nobody got to tend that but her. She was very, 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 very specific on how that was taken care of. And then after that, my great-grandmother ended up coming down with cancer. So left the city, sold everything out there, and moved closer to the hospital for treatments. So family pretty much transitioned that way. I didn't necessarily grow up with my immediate family doing a lot of farming. I remember, and I wish I had it for this show, but it's been misplaced somewhere. But my great-grandfather, he grew up on a farm, full-fledged working farm out in North Dakota. And so he had this whole huge, thick garden journal on everything that he did in the garden. So he wrote down everything about green beans, peas, tomatoes, cucumbers, everything was in that journal. So I'm really hoping we can find that out at my grandparents' place one of these days.
Yeah, that's a lot of information though.
Yeah, because there are times now where I kind of go, gee, I really wish I could have talked to my grandfather about this. He probably would have known, and he would have just shook his head at me and gone, and gone on. But for the most part, I was in city throughout my childhood. So part of my childhood, I was at Children's Hospital here in the state. So we would transfer from there and then we would come home, and home was still, it's a small town, but it was smaller then than now, and it's still a small town, but it was still a town. We had a Walmart, so we were a big deal in this area, this neck of the woods. There were outlying people from surrounding towns that would come into our town to shop at the Walmart.
At the big fancy Walmart.
Yeah, big fancy Walmart. Back when they had fish. It was back when they had fish. I remember that because you could find all the kids over there with the goldfish.
Oh, wow. So you do a lot of things from your garden. One of them was my sister saw it and she had a lot of questions about it. But one of them was soap. You make your own soap from your own gardens, and there's two different styles of making it. And I remember, I'm trying to read it at the same time. You have melt and pour, and you have cold press, right?
Yeah, there is also a hot process that you can do. That is not my preferred method, just because when you hot process something, what it does is it intensely stabilizes it. So it's really great in that respect. So you have a soap bar that'll last you 20 years. It's not going to just evaporate or disappear on the shelf. You'll have it forever. But the bad side to that is that with the hot processing, you've cooked down a lot of the really essential and nutrient dense ingredients in the soap.
Okay.
So then you are countering and having to add those back in to compensate for the dryness. So if you think of like our great grandparents era where they're talking about good old fashioned lye soap, it'll take your nail off. You have a hard process soap that can do that if you process it that way.
And in some of your videos, you're actually taking stuff from your garden and you're adding it into these soaps, correct?
Yes, that's exactly what we are doing. And that actually started a lot of what you see here, just due to some allergy and inflammatory issues that I had. And then friends and family were developing other skin issues. So I just broadened what I was doing. And then family finally said, and friends, you should put this out there. You should try selling. And it's really, really funny because a lot of my hard and fast customers, they'll do a 6-month order at once, but their main complaint is I don't use as much soap.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that.
They're not going through it as much. It's not like a store-bought soap where it's just melting away, I guess you could say.
Yeah. No, I didn't even think of something like that, or just having that option of it being an irritant of your skin. I didn't think of. Is that's you? Did you start by doing the garden and then got into the other things, or did you have something that triggered the whole start of the process?
The whole start of the process for me was in my early 20s. I had just started kicking off my career and I was experiencing the early burnout, where you are working as much as you possibly can and you're not sleeping enough. You're chasing your tail basically. And my cure, ironically, was I picked up a basil plant at the local Walmart and put it in a pot with some soil. And I actually had to go and buy soil and a pot because I realized after I got to the car that I would have to do something with this poor little basil plant. It was going to need a home. I didn't have any pots at that point in time. I had no soil, nothing really to work with. And so I stopped and I got some and I came home and I planted it and I put it out front directly under the water spout. So when I was running out to the car, I would just turn it on for like a minute or two, let it flood with water, turn it off, and I would jump in my car and go to work.
That's funny.
Well,
that's how that started. So it started with pesto for me because I love to cook. That was my, I guess you could say, my cathartic way that I would just chill out after a lot of work and everything. And then we branched, of course, into tomatoes. It's a logical leap that you go from basil to tomatoes. They're they're hand in hand. And then it went into cucumbers from there. And we had an herb garden at that point too that we had built, and I was trying to get lavender to take, which was and still is a fairly large challenge in our climate and area just because of the humidity. They prefer dry and they don't like to be wet, and it's constantly wet in the south. So it took 7 years for me to get a lavender that would take and stay established. But I found one. It's a Czech lavender, basically an heirloom plant that was cultivated in a very similar climate to what we have going on. So it was already acclimated and it took beautifully from there.
You do a lot of things with the lavender. I was watching. You put that in your soap?
Yeah. That's one of the ingredients. It's actually one of my most popular soaps. I ended up being a little bit surprised. It's a rosemary and lavender soap that I put together. And I actually even enjoy using it. And I'm not a huge fan of lavender. That's the thing that people are always amazed at, is that I tried for so long to get a lavender plant to stick when I don't like lavender.
Yeah. You knew it's essential. You knew you needed it.
Yeah, exactly. It was one of those. I loved the plants. I love the way they look. I love how they smell in the garden. But always for me, and it was more of the chemical fragrances that I didn't like the lavender of. So when I started using the natural ingredients and translating them into soaps and bath bomb products and skin lotions, I found that I enjoyed it a lot more.
Yeah,
And
you also have you were doing incense in one of your videos. That's also from your garden, correct?
yeah. I forgot about that. That's probably 2 years ago that I did that. That was actually from our purple sage. So
Okay.
you'll commonly, if you go to a health food store or anything, you can find pretty easily sage bundles. And usually what they use is a white sage, but growing the white sage when it's out in the garden itself, I find it to be a little abrasive when it's fresh.
Mhm.
And so we wanted a sage that we liked both dried, obviously, and fresh, because we use fresh herbs the same way that we would use dry herbs. But we were trying to decide on what kind of a plant, and then we landed on the purple lavender, or the purple sage, excuse me. And it's just beautiful, even burned. When you dry it and you burn it, I was really impressed, because things always are different. Even if they're in the same family, they can have a little bit different scent depending upon how you use it. So
Mhm.
yeah.
I also saw some of the things you were making tea. Now, were these teas coming out of your garden?
Yeah, teas will come out of the garden as well. I usually put a blend together, and that's probably going to be down the line a little bit further, but we are looking at doing calming sachets, herbal teas, things along those lines that are going to be coming off of the homestead. Right now, we're in that middle period of growth where we need to be able to expand what we have so that it can continue to support us, but can also continue and broaden out and help other people too.
Yeah, going back to the bath bombs and lotions, I totally forgot about those. I might have seen it, but went over it real quick. But that's also available through pretty much your website or whatever you have.
Yeah, I've actually been in the process of building a new website off of a new platform. So we're expanding things there, and I'm actually in the process of working on some lavender bath bombs right now. So these guys are in the cure process here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And where would someone go to check these out? What website or what link would we put on here?
It's CasitaJardin.com. So I'll make sure and give you guys that link.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was not ask you, but I wanted to make a comment is I love how when she's in the garden, if a bee comes along or, if you have a spider or you have an insect and you'll explain which ones are actually helpful for your garden. So you actually like them, like a bee. I never knew a bee takes an image of your face and considers you a threat or not. I never knew that.
Yeah, which is kind of funny that you bring that up, because I'm actually sporting a bee sting here.
Oh, I was wondering if you get stung by them.
Well, it's not very often. It has been about 3 years since I've had a bee sting, I want to say. I can't blame the guys under these. Well, actually, it was a female from this variety of bee that stung me. It's actually a type of sweat bee, but with sweat bees, only the females will sting. So they're usually the attackers, whereas it's the males that will come for, the salt in your sweat.
Okay.
But these guys are very, very heavy pollinators, and they've been in our garden for years and years, but they decided to make themselves a home in the permaculture area, and I didn't know it. So when I went into water and they had made their hole, because they make a hole in the ground, usually they do it along a ridge line. So we're a little surprised that they opted to put
Right, the
themselves
walkway.
where they did. Yeah, because if we get a downpour of rain, that's really going to affect their little home there. They could get themselves washed out. So I didn't realize they were there and watered them, and they took exception to my presence under those circumstances. But it's been kind of funny the last couple of days because I know the pheromones from the sting must still be in my system, but the bees are a little confused. And they started to run me out of the garden when I was watering. So I had to back off and just stop watering the garden, which is not really great this time of the year because it's really hot and dry. It's really funny because they'll be bopping around my face because they'll just sort of zoom right at me, and then they're just hopping around. So it's almost like they're confused because we know you, but you don't stink right.
Yeah, they can smell that pheromone still. I get it
Right,
now.
exactly. Today I went out and they were totally fine with me. So everything must be back to normal.
Do you pick this up as you go? Are you studying insects? You see something, so you go research it, or is it just always been kind of a passion of yours and you just now get to enforce it a little more?
I think it's always been a little bit of a pet project, pet passion. I never had the opportunity before to really expand it the way that I have now. And I actually ended up being a certified aromatherapist and family herbalist before we were even expanded to this point here. And so I've always had an interest in nature and flowers and plants. And I think I could probably go back and blame my mom for that. When I was in the hospital and they were putting me on experimental seizure medication that had just come out, one of the primary concerns was kidney and liver failure. So my mom decided to blend up a tea, and it tastes amazing. That's the other thing. It tastes good. She blended a tea and I drank it every single day. And I remember being in the kitchen with her and blending the tea and making the tea with the teapot and everything. So I have really fond memories of that. Sure, there's some bad in there when you think about it, but I have yet to have any kidney or liver issues, and the doctors are still amazed at that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And she would take me to our local prairies. She would take me hiking, and she would let me explore and look at bark and bring home rocks. We still bring home rocks. It's really weird. And it's actually a family trait. We didn't really realize this until about a year ago. And it comes from my grandfather on my mom's side. Whenever we are out and we're doing things and exploring, we just pick up a random rock. Couldn't explain to you why, but it's just one of those. We'll be walking along. It'll be on the beach. It'll be out in the middle of the desert somewhere. And, oh, I like that rock. I'm going to keep that rock. Or my grandfather, from the time I was probably 4 years old, he would pick up a rock that he'd like and he'd hand it and he'd give it to me to keep. And he did the same thing with my mom, and my mom did the same thing with me. And so we've just been in this really weird cycle all of our
Rocket
lives.
stations.
Yeah, we had noticed it. And my grandmother pointed it out. She goes, "What is with this collecting of rocks?" And we kind of just looked at each other. We went, what are you talking about? It's like, your grandfather, he collects rocks. He goes outside and he finds a rock and then he brings it in. And it's not like we do have some, I shouldn't say that. We do have some large ones, but usually they're smaller.
Where do they go? Is there like a box where they go in the garden, or?
We have jars of them.
Okay. Jars of rocks.
Larger ones, because with all the holes that we're digging, we're yanking out some pretty large rocks. So she's actually collected a few and put them strategically as decorations in the garden.
So also, Heather, what I wanted to talk about besides the teas, you make a lot of things, on your program. Like I watched you canning pickles. I saw you doing the preservatives or preserves. I'm sorry. Those things I'm interested in because after watching you, I had actually called my mom and was like, "Oh, we got to do the pears that you have, because she has a pear tree."
No way.
Yeah, I said, so we should do something, and try do some pear preserves or something like that. After I watch your show, I get all these ideas. It's just hard for me I live in a condominium, so I have a very small deck area. But you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you do as far as what you bring in from the garden and you prepare for later consumption.
Well, when it comes to our urban homestead, because we are urban, of course, our space is a little bit larger than yours, John. But there are obviously things that we can't grow here. So realistically, what we do is we look at what we can grow. And this year we are attempting to figure out what more we can grow.
Okay.
So we have our basic crops that we know and that we have done, but we are trying to expand to grow as much as we possibly can of what we know we consume in this household.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that we like and enjoy dried beans. Okay. So what we have been doing, and technically what we're growing, the cowpea and the red ripper, is more in the black-eyed pea family. So it's kind of more of a dried pea. Mm-hmm. But we know that that's something that we're going to want to have on hand. And that's something that's very easily dried. You can just leave it on the counter for a week or 2 weeks, depending upon how large the bean is. You can use a dehydrator. You can put your oven on the lowest setting and put them in there for 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending upon the size. Mm-hmm. And then you can have dried beans. Number one has to be what we are needing to eat. Number two, we have to be able to prepare it in such a way that we want to eat it, because a lot of times what I've run into is people who've said, yeah, I did that and I did all this work and I don't like it. Mm-hmm. If you don't like canned green beans, canning your green beans may not be the way to go.
Right. It's almost, when we had Steve on, he was a prepper and he was mm-hmm. talking about that. Don't store foods that you don't eat.
Yeah, because there's somebody else that probably will eat them. So don't buy them. Mm-hmm. Because somebody else will probably find them to be of more value than you, because right. You don't really like them. I understand the premise of having a food stable item, but if it's not something that you're going to eat, don't worry about having it in your house, because number two, it's not just something that you're not going to eat, but you're having to make space for it. So if you're in a tight space already, making space for us, 20 pounds of rice makes no sense, because we maybe consume 5 pounds in a year, because we just don't eat a lot of rice in this house. So there is that. So for here, we are trying to expand our reach a little bit. We've got elderberry bushes that are out there and growing. It usually takes 2, sometimes 3 years, depending upon type of elderberry that you have. We have an American elderberry out there. We also have blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, but they're still small. They're not producing a whole lot, but we know that's going to take time. Same as the asparagus that we put out there this year. That's going to take about 2 years before we can harvest off of it, let alone have enough to preserve or keep over winter.
Let me say this real quick, because she brought up the elderberry. There is a video where she makes elderberry syrup.
Yeah, I need to go in and I need to make a continuation of that, because that elderberry syrup recipe is actually using a European elderberry, and you do have to cook European elderberry, whereas you don't American elderberry, because it's not toxic when it's eaten raw.
And I just wanted to say, Tom has a background. He's a chef. He used to be
really?
A chef. So a lot of this stuff, I know he's coming up with some questions there, because I can see him.
Mine's more or less along the lines of, how do you know how much to plant? You said you don't want to have 20 pounds of rice, but how do you know if you're planting not enough or too much? I mean, that's just trial and error, because
A little bit, yeah, yes. You do have to go through some trial and error. The other thing that I recommend is learning to eat seasonally. So for instance, have you guys been eating tomatoes?
I'm not a huge tomato fan though.
I just bought some.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tomatoes, even to right now, are technically still being hothoused. So you've got them in polytunnel situations, which is completely and utterly fine. There's nothing wrong with those tomatoes. A lot of people do that to extend or to increase their yield because of their climate or whatever they have going on. But tomatoes are not actually ready until now. They're just now growing on the vines in main garden areas. So learning to eat with the seasons is number one. And that's going to look a lot different than what we're used to culturally, because we're used to seeing, as soon as spring hits, we're seeing stuff for salad, right? We're seeing cucumbers, we're seeing tomatoes, we're seeing peppers, we're seeing all of those fresh produce things. So we're automatically associating in our minds that this is the time of year for that item, when it's not necessarily that time of year.
And I didn't even put two and two together till you just said that, and it makes sense because my wife takes our kids all the time to, we have a lot of farms around here that you do picking of their farms. So 2-3 weeks ago, I believe it was strawberries. We had so many strawberries on our counter. And now I just walked in, there's like corn on the counter. There's some green beans on the counter. So they went picking again, but it made sense because it was a bunch of a lot of strawberries out of nowhere. So
yes. Yeah. And that's what happens in spring. And so for me in spring, instead of doing what I probably would have done 10 years ago, I basically rework how I cook and how I preserve. So in the spring, I'm eating a lot of kale and spinach and strawberry salads with maybe some local nuts that came off of a walnut harvest, because that's really what is flourishing in the area at the time. Right now, we are well past the strawberry, blueberry season. We had a local farm that put out the APB, come get the blueberries off the bushes. This is it. This is your last chance.
Wow. That's good stuff.
Yeah. So learning how to eat with the seasons and how to preserve what you have in that season. So when I started to do that, and that is very challenging. So if you have a chef background, that might be, if you want a challenge for yourself and to see what you can do, that might be something fun for you to do. I know I've done it for myself because it's one of those, okay, I need to use what I've got and what's going on around me. So what is going on around me? The other thing that you could take into consideration is, depending upon your area and the amount of farmers and growers that you have, you could look at seeing if there's a local farm that raises meat chickens, because a lot of places will raise the chickens in early spring and they'll be ready mostly around May, depends upon the area of the country and how cold it is. Here, they try not to raise them too far past May because it just gets too hot for the chicks to really grow well and to really thrive and to put on a good amount of weight. So for us, May and then September, October is usually when we can get meat chickens in our area. So if you don't have the space to grow something, like I did peaches, I don't have the space for a peach tree. Peach tree usually requires more than one. You have to have at least two in order to get it to fruit if you want fruit. So I go local. I look for the local sources, and there are things that we just don't have here. Obviously, things that I love nectarines, but nobody grows nectarines around here. Same with plums. We don't have anybody growing plums because they can't grow plums well. Same with cherries. So worst case scenario, I have to look at what I have immediate access to. And right now, in this time of the year, I'm actually able to source beef locally because they had the calf's grown on, has sized up, and they've taken it to meat market to butcher and break down. So that's what I'm looking at right now based on the season. And then unfortunately, you just have to sort of play it by ear and figure out what your family does and doesn't eat, what you do and do not want to prepare, because 90% of your food work is going to be in prep. So like when I did those peaches, that was an all-day process. Mm-hmm. I got 7 jars off of 6 pounds, 7 jars. So you have to decide where the value is. So, do you value having peach preserves? If you don't put the energy into it.
I see.
Yeah. So you don't want to waste time. You don't want to waste energy on something that you are not going to enjoy, your family's not going to want to eat, and that you don't find valuable.
It wasn't that she grew it. The peach or the pear tree came with the house. It was one of those things, but I understand what you're saying. Like one time I got into making wine, and I failed miserably. I made 5 gallons of a pinkish, what turned out to be almost a vinegary taste, so I failed on that. But, it's not that we grew the tree. It's just like every year, instead of canning it, let's try to make some preserves. Let's try something different, because she ends up with a tons of pears on the ground, so it's like, let's try this.
And you might try pear butter too. Pear butter. Yeah, pear butter. It might actually be easier. You can actually use a crock pot.
Wow.
For pear butter.
Yeah.
A little bit less labor intensive, but yeah, I wish we had pears around here. We don't have pears.
I did have a question though. I wanted to get a little bit into urban growing. Like people like us, does that fall under, I'm reading my notes over here, raised garden beds? Does it fall under that, or is that something totally different?
It can. It just depends upon your situation. There are other growers that are maybe more in the market growing that are at least double, if not triple the size of what we are here. And they'll grow in raised beds. And sometimes that's just easier. Number one, you have complete control over the soil. So there is that bonus. Whereas in ground, especially if you're moving into a place that is new to you, I do recommend doing at least a basic soil test, and you can get those little boxes at most of the big box stores anymore. So Home Depot, Lowe's, a garden center would have access to those little kits for you as well. And you can do them at home, and it'll give you an idea of what's going on with your soil. If you don't want to invest in doing that, if you don't want to take the time to do that, that's okay too. Just know that you're going to have to amend, and that's going to be compost.
Okay.
So it just depends on where you are. I know there are areas of the country where they have basically stripped the soil, so to speak, because of lack of rotational cropping. That's a big issue, but I get it, especially for the commercial growers. They are contracted to grow certain crops and only those crops. So that is a little bit of an issue, I think, as a nation, we should probably address, because that really will deplete the soil over time. So then they're having to go in and use these heavy chemical fertilizers to compensate.
Yeah. I have a couple friends who actually garden, and that's the thing they focus on. Every single one of them, that's the thing they focus on the most is one. Yeah. It's almost like a 3-year rotation. So they do, in thirds. So that way the soil takes different nutrients from the soil, allows the other ones to regenerate or whatever.
That's actually an interesting point, because we didn't really pay attention to what we did. We should have paid closer attention to it, but it ended up working out well, because last year we have one of our original beds. We call it the tomato bed. We're working on trying to figure out what to name our beds so that we know which bed we're talking about when we're communicating to each other. But our original bed that we expanded last year had the cowpea in it. And that was our first year growing dried beans. When we figured out we could actually grow dry beans in an urban setting, it opened up a whole new world, so to speak. But the side bonus of having planted that plant was it was a feeder. And and when I say a feeder, I mean it fed the soil. It increased the nitrogen in the soil, exactly, which it also increased the magnesium as well. So when we put our tomatoes in this year, and thankfully I put the worst tomatoes that we had growing on into that bed, because I really thought that our white currant tomatoes were not going to live. They were gnarly. It's one of those, they're not, they're only mostly dead. They're only mostly dead.
Okay.
And my mom said, put them in the ground anyway. So I did. And they have turned into bushes out there.
Yeah.
That's primarily because we fed the soil. And the other thing that you can do is not just rotational crop, but seasonal cropping. And I feel like that's not talked about enough either, because if you do seasonal gardening, and what I mean by that is you have a spring garden, you have a summer garden, you have a fall garden, and you have a winter garden. And when you go in, and I get it, not everybody likes beets. Using beets as a cover crop, number one, to amend your soil, and number two, it gives you another harvest. But if you don't like beets, I get it, not everybody likes beets. Once again, go on ahead and try other fall crops. Things like turnips. Turnips are a very quick turnaround plant that will help amend the soil, help add nutrients back into the soil for the next season. Radishes are really great for the soil. They help to repel the bugs that you don't want. They're amazing roasted. Just going to say that.
Okay.
Roast them in an oven with butter, salt, and pepper, and there's nothing better.
I'm gonna have to try that.
Yeah, I'm to die for. Anyway. So seasonal gardening does have its benefits that way, but the main thing is soil health. So compost.
That's why
feed the soil, you feed your plant.
See, that's why I plan on having you on more and more, because there's so much I want to talk about. We talked about on the pre-interview, we talked about the tower. We talked about that.
That might be its own show. I don't know.
Let me explain to Tom real quick. She has this. I forgot what you call it. It's a tower.
It's a green stalk grow tower.
Yeah, and my sister loved it, and she had me ask questions about that. I don't think we're going to be able to get it on this show. We did talk about the soil issues.
The basic concept, not too detailed, just the basic concept. Because all I know right now is it's a tower. That's it.
Okay, so imagine a tower, and the tower's made up of separate tiers. So they're anywhere from 5 to 7 tiers, and each tier is filled with soil. It has a percolation method from the top where it goes all the way down. You can do a complete hydroponic system or not, depends upon your setup. But
we'll save that for the next episode. But that one, I get the vision now. Now it comes real quick.
The one thing that I promised Heather that I was going to talk about, because you and I are big on prepping and everything. So zombie apocalypse, we got it going on right now. Everybody's gone, and you have to grow some stuff to survive. What are you growing?
Not lettuce.
Not lettuce?
Not lettuce. That would be my first response. A lot of the prepper boxes come loaded with a lot of lettuce seeds. Now, I have nothing against lettuce, and lettuce does have nutrients, but it doesn't have as many nutrients as you need, because if you really think about it, you're not going to have access to anything under the worst case scenario. So you need to have what is going to be the most nutritious for you and your family, and you need to preserve it accordingly. So kale, spinach, those are going to be more important to me than lettuce. Okay. Besides that, I can cultivate lettuce seeds pretty easily. You just let them go to flower when it gets hot, and they will just drop their seeds, and you will have tons and tons of seeds for lettuce. So it's not hard to get lettuce seeds. You can do that yourself. There's no sense in wasting your money on that when you can be putting that money into a more profitable crop.
And you were saying that the seeds don't have an expiration date like they do on the actual prepper's box itself.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of misunderstanding when it comes to seed packet date. The FDA requires all producers of seeds, I guess you could call them, to put an expiration on there. Now, let me preface that by saying you will have a little bit lower germination the older that they get, but that doesn't mean that the seeds are bad. So instead of me putting in only 1 or 2 seeds, I may need to put 5 in to get a plant as time goes on. But I have seeds here at home that are 7+ years old that I still grow off of. So just because the packet says a certain date does not mean you need to throw those seeds out. Save your seeds.
And there's no such thing. I was actually talking with Steve, the prepper at work, and he mentioned something to ask about, there aren't seeds that are only going to grow that one crop and then they become sterile after that, or does that make sense? Or it doesn't, there's no such thing?
Well, it depends upon the seeds. So you do have heirloom seeds, and obviously the name kind of gives it away. It's a very, very old seed that's been cultivated for 50+ years.
Okay.
Then you have what you could define as your hybrid seeds. And this is also a misnomer that is on the market. When you go to the store, if the seed packet does not say non-GMO or organic, that does not mean that the seed is a GMO seed. So you're actually paying for labeling that you don't really need to pay for. So get the seeds. Because for us in the national market, people like me, people like you guys, you are not going to have access to purchase genetically modified seeds. You have to be a major commercial grower to have access to those seeds. So get the seeds. I don't care what they are. I don't care what the package says. Just get the seeds. If you know it's a seed or a plant that you're going to eat, get the seed. But what happens with a hybrid seed is the hybrid, if I go to save, say, a seed off of the cucumber, because I have a hybrid cucumber right now. It's called the Katrina. It's a smooth-skinned cucumber, very beautiful cucumber. But if I go and I save the seed out of that cucumber and I plant that seed next year, I'm not going to have the Katrina plant because it's 2 plants that have been put together by a market grower who wanted a cucumber with very specific attributes. They wanted a smooth skin. They wanted less seeds inside. They wanted it more meaty, more resistant to pests. It could be anything that way. Same thing as when they do different roses and how they graft on to get certain types of roses. It's kind of the same process, just with a seed. But that seed is not going to give me that Katrina plant. So it's going to give me one of the parent plants or something completely different. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't eat the produce off of it. That produce is going to be perfectly fine, but it's just going to be a surprise cucumber plant that you don't know what its attributes are going to be.
I see.
So depending upon your situation, say you are a market grower and you need to have a very specific type of cucumber or a very specific type of tomato, it needs to be smooth. Obviously, Tom, working restaurant, you kind of know what I'm talking about here. You're looking for a very set size, very set consistent look from one cucumber, one tomato to the next. In that case, market growers will purchase hybridized seeds, which are perfectly fine. They are not genetically modified. There is no spider DNA, no pig DNA or anything in them. They're just 2 of the whatever it is put together for the specific attributes. So they will grow them so that they can sell them to restaurants or to local grocers that they have contracts with that are looking for very specific items.
And then the following year, they'll just do the hybrid again. They won't replant other seeds. They'll just go right back to that same seed. So technically it's a 1-year seed, but it's not. It's only for a certain purpose.
Yeah, it's for a certain purpose for that season. So if you are in a zombie apocalypse, you can totally grow these hybrid seeds, but seed saving off of them, just be aware, you're going to get cucumbers, but you don't know what you're going to get unless you know what the parent plant is. And usually most seed companies will tell you what they cross. They'll give you that information on the websites. They're pretty open about that. So you can definitely find out that information, and then you can just play around and see what you get and whether or not you like it. But if you want something consistent, you can go with an heirloom. We grow primarily heirlooms here, but that's just what grows well for me. That doesn't mean that it's going to grow well for you. We have friends that actually grow VF1 tomatoes, which are a hybrid tomato, and they succession sow them. So they have what is a determinate variety. That means that there's a determined amount of tomatoes that that plant will produce at a very specific time of the year, and then it is done. So doing that, they can succession sow their tomatoes. Whereas what I grow is an indeterminate. That means there is not a determined size, amount, or timeline that it's going to produce. But that's what grows well for me. We've tried the determinate tomatoes, and we don't get the yield that we do off of our indeterminates that we have here. So that would be the other thing. Know what you can grow and grow it well. Third thing, find friends, make friends with people in your neighborhood. If you're in a zombie apocalypse, don't all grow the same thing. Get together and grow what you can grow well in the space that you have, and then grow enough for you and to share. That actually will help increase your yields. Overall, there are communities that have done specific tests and trials on this with their farmers markets, where at one point in time, everybody was growing tomatoes. But, you know, everybody growing tomatoes isn't necessarily helpful at a farmer's market because there was nothing else. So if everybody's growing tomatoes, that doesn't make sense. So they all got together and they divvied up what they wanted to grow, because some people didn't want to grow tomatoes. Some wanted to grow the cucumbers. Somebody else wanted to grow peppers. Somebody else wanted to focus on beans. Somebody else wanted to do the lettuces and the kales. So get together and make friends, because that's going to help you more than you can possibly imagine. And I know in the social media age, we are so connected that we are disconnected. So get face to face with people and get that community going, because that will go a long way in learning and in being able to cultivate, and under these circumstances, survival.
Even at the end of my road, I can drive to the end of my road, and there's I believe they turn their front yards into gardens, 2 large gardens on the way to a stop sign at the end of my road. So I could become good friends with them.
Yeah, that's kind of like us. Yeah.
Well, Tom, you see why I reached out to her. She has so many things on her channel. I got a list here. We didn't even touch half of it, but you know, if you got any questions, not only commenting on this one, but go to her channel, La Casita Jardin. She's not Hispanic, because when I said that to a few people, they were like, "Oh, she's Hispanic." I'm like, no, it's just the name of her channel. But
well, I do have Hispanic blood. I don't claim it because I can't speak a lick of Spanish. I can't. My tongue is like, I can't do foreign languages. It's broke.
You know, but she will get back to you. You know, and she has a video for every little thing. If you're into gardening, you want to learn this, or you're having issues with that, if she has a video for it. If not, just go on to any video that she has, or Instagram, and just ask her a question. She will get back to you, you know, and she has a lot of great information, things that I'm not a gardener or a homesteader, but you know, this winter I am going to try something. I haven't decided what yet, but I'm going to try setting up something for next year. I'm going to grow something on my little patio there, you know. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been awesome.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out to talk. So
no, it's been awesome. And of course, throughout the video, we're going to be putting some stuff up. We're going to be putting links to her channel there. We're going to be putting pictures, her contact information at the end of the channel there, or at the end of the video. I'm sorry. Tom, do you have anything?
No, we'll just back up everything said. We greatly appreciate your company there.
But I wanted a little surprise here. She ends her videos. We got a nice little thing she says, and we're going to end this video. So go ahead, Heather, and end it the way you do.
Okay. Well, guys, Thanks for coming back to the channel. And as always, keep it simple, natural, and essential. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.